The lengths to which game companies are willing to go to these days in order to make the big bucks is quite shocking and disheartening. I mean, now we have seen so many games over the years that had so much potential but fell flat because it was ruined by monetization that ultimately marred the core design. So a game like Star Wars Battlefront 2, that's a classic example. It had solid core mechanics, great graphics. It had a lot going for it, but at launch, all of that was kind of completely robbed by EA's live service mandate. All that potential just went away. And since then, the publishers tried to make all kinds of justifications from, oh, we didn't mean to make a slot machine, to, oh, it's player choice, to loot boxes are quite fun and quite ethical. And worst of all, of course, is loot boxes, no, they are surprise mechanics. And yeah, I'm gonna keep bringing that up because it is one of the most farcical things I've ever heard. But it's especially off-putting to listen to people who come up with predatory monetization schemes revel in the psychological manipulation that goes behind them. A few days ago, I released a video detailing information conveyed in this keynote from back in 2016. This keynote was delivered by Tribeflame CEO Torolf Jernstrom, and the information presented here was disgusting, to say the least. The fact that the presentation was titled Let's Go Whaling was pretty telling of its content and of how it dehumanizes consumers as cattle to be milked or prey to be hunted. But as if that wasn't enough, here's an interesting audio clip that was recently brought to my attention. The following clip was uploaded by YouTube user Big Kudafish all the way back in 2011, and what's featured here is an audio recording of a stockholder meeting that EA held way back when. This is definitely really old. It's like at least 8 years old, even older than Jernstrom's presentation. But the information conveyed in this audio recording is quite enlightening, to say the least. Now, back in 2011, Android Wilson wasn't the CEO of the company. At the time, he was the executive vice president of EA Sports. Instead, the company was run by former CEO John Riccitiello, who resigned in 2013 before Andrew Wilson took over. So, who we're listening to here is none other than Riccitiello, and while this is a different CEO from Andrew Wilson, you can definitely tell that a lot of his philosophy carried on to the EA that we all know and hate today. So without further ado, take a listen to what Riccitiello had to say. As a side note, there's some music added by the user who uploaded the video. That wasn't me, but I have to say the music is quite fitting.
The second thing, and this is a point that I think might be lost on many, is a big and substantial portion of digital revenues are microtransactions. When you are 6 hours into playing Battlefield and you run out of ammo in your clip and we ask you for $1 to reload, you're really not very price sensitive at that point in time. And for what it's worth, the cogs on the clip really low. And so essentially what ends up happening, and the reason the play first, pay later model works so nicely, is the consumer gets engaged in a property. They might spend 10, 20, 30, 50 hours on the game. And then when they're deep into the game, they're well invested in it. We're not gouging, but we're charging. And at that point in time, the commitment can be pretty high. As a personal anecdote, I spent about $5,000 calendar year to date on doing just this thing, this type of thing on our products and others. I can readily attest to how well it works. But it's a great model, and I think it represents a substantially better future for the industry.
Yeah, that may very well be just about the scummiest minute of audio dialogue I've heard from the games industry, and this is just a single conversation that we know of. It's legitimately sickening to hear this guy gloat to investors and shareholders about how well psychological manipulation works on unsuspecting and susceptible customers, while touting how this will all be great for the industry. This feels like the kind of speech you'd hear from the main villain of a frickin' James Bond movie. Okay, so let's break this all down, shall we? One of the first things he did to highlight the monetization potential of microtransactions was provide this example with the Battlefield franchise. He basically proposed to shareholders a scenario in which players are in the middle of playing a match and all of a sudden they run out of ammo, at which point the game might prompt users to spend $1 or $2 to get an extra ammo clip. At that point, the player players are in the heat of the moment, they may not be price sensitive and thinking analytically due to the fact that there is this immediate urgent need for extra ammo, and so that might incentivize them to, on the spot, spend that money. Funny thing is that the behavioral psychology behind this scheme is something that Jernstrom covered at length in his Let's Go Whaling presentation. It's something that he called hot state, which is a fast form of thinking of the human brain that's more compulsive and reflexive and less analytical and forward-thinking. Here's how Jernstrom himself explained this concept.
Hot state. There's an excellent book about behavioral psychology called Thinking Fast and Slow. This is the fast thinking. I'm telling you that the fast thinking mode is what you want. The slow thinking is your analytical brain. What's 12 times 47? I'm sure all of you can answer that, but you have to start your actual thinking brain to do that. Now, if I say, complete the sentence, bread and everyone's thought, butter. So that's the fast thinking. Our brain works in these two modes, and starting the analytical part of your brain is too much to ask for a spend. How it applies to games is make stuff immediately useful, immediate gratification. If you have a level-based game and you sell some boosters up front, for instance, a coin doubler or some other stuff that will help you, people will have to analyze and think it through. These things are good for me, these will help me progress before they do it. And they won't do that. If, on the other hand, you do, like, for instance, in this temple run, once your game is over, save me, I have a few seconds to spend hard currency and I get to continue. Or similar in Candy Crush Saga, at the very moment that I've lost, I can see I just played a bit more, I can pass it. Make it immediately useful.
So two examples Jernstrom brought up that perfectly highlighted this concept of hot state are Temple Run and Candy Crush. In both of these games, if you die and run out of lives, players will be prompted to pay a bit of money to get extra lives so they can pick right back up where they left off or where they died. And because at that point the brain is in this fast state of thinking, in this hot state where there is the need for immediate use of something in order to mitigate an unfortunate scenario, people will be more compelled to spend out of impulse, out of the urgent need to keep going, to keep progressing and what have you. This is different from long-term boosters and stuff, which require players to think about long-term benefits, to be analytical about what they're getting for the item they're paying for, and that stuff doesn't sell quite as well, which is why Jernstrom insisted that if you want to monetize players, you need to take advantage of this fast form of thinking, the hot state. All of this ties right back to what Riccatello talked about in that 2011 shareholders meeting. What he proposed here with the whole concept of selling ammo restocks in Battlefield was very much him thinking about exploiting the concept of hot state. During a match, a player may run out of ammo, at which point they're pretty much screwed unless they pay up. So in the heat of the moment, they might want to get more ammo for immediate use, and in turn, they'll be more compelled to spend money on impulse should the game prompt them to spend that money. Now, back in 2011, EA's idea was seemingly to get a system like this up and running in a AAA franchise like Battlefield. This was this long-term plan they intended on easing gamers into over the years, little by little, pushing the envelope of microtransactions inch by inch with each game and each passing year, making things just a little bit more egregious as to not attract too much attention to the inch warming that they were doing towards their ideal monetization schemes that would bring about the most revenue. But with the botched release of Star Wars Battlefront 2, where EA got overzealous and turned heads with their pay-to-win loot boxes, thereby drawing attention from consumers and government officials alike, with all the negative reception surrounding microtransactions in AAA games now because of EA's blunder, this is a plan that didn't quite pan out as intended. In fact, EA has actually been forced to go on the defensive on multiple occasions by using the whole no loot boxes and cosmetics only mantra to their advantage in order to market some of their games. But that doesn't mean that Riccatello's idea for how microtransactions could look like in Battlefield completely went away. Instead of implementing hot state microtransactions in AAA games, which attract a lot more scrutiny, EA under Andrew Wilson's leadership, as well as other greedy publishers who jumped on the microtransactions bandwagon, decided to transition into adding this kind of hot state monetization more prominently into mobile games, which are played by far more people, the casual crowd in particular, are far cheaper to make, and much more easily go under the radar, generally receiving less media coverage amongst video game enthusiasts. That's not to say that hot state microtransactions are completely absent from modern AAA games. They're just far more commonly and blatantly found in mobile games that offer things like revives and other consumables that grant urgent, heat-of-the-moment, instantly gratifying benefits. Now, something else that Riccatello mentioned was how the reason this kind of monetization is effective is because of the emotional investment people have in games after spending dozens of hours in them. The whole idea is that people will feel like they've put all this time and resources into a game and it feel like a waste to just stop, so they keep playing and keep spending to feel like they're getting their time and money's worth, and this kind of behavioral trap is commonly known as the sunk cost fallacy, a vicious cycle that the more people get caught up in, the harder it becomes to get out of, because the more people keep investing in something, in an experience, in a game, what have you, the more wasteful it feels to just stop, even if continuing that activity is ultimately to their detriment. This whole concept is also something that Jørgen Strom brought up in his presentation, citing multiple times how because people have to do some work in these games, the players become committed in a way that drives further engagement and further monetization.
If you spend your hard currency on this guy, you will only get the benefit from him if you then keep coming back to the game very often. So it drives both retention and monetization. Build stuff that makes people come back to your game a lot in order to get the value out of that. The IKEA effect. This is to say, stuff that we put work into, we value more highly. IKEA really sells you cardboard stuff. It's shit. But you value it still somehow slightly higher because you actually built it yourselves. The model over here is from a psychology book called Hooked, How to Build Hooking Products. This is how we build habits. There's a trigger to remind us to do something, then we go do an action, we get the variable reward, just like the gachas, we get the lottery ticket, and then to really hook it down, we need to ask people to do something for us, do a little bit of work, because then they become emotionally attached to that. And then we set up the next trigger, either internal or external. External trigger means really a notification in our case. Internal that people have in their minds that, I started building that tower or I planted pumpkins, that means I need to come back in 8 hours. So that's the trigger. And then we go round and round and we have the habit.
So as you can see, all of these CEOs who may feign ignorance about the immorality of their business models when it comes to microtransactions know exactly what they're doing when mandating shady gameplay-marring, psychologically manipulative monetization. Oftentimes, whenever there's backlash surrounding some of their games' monetization, these game companies' executives will claim that, it wasn't their intention to make monetization egregious, that this all happened by accident somehow, but there's ample proof that this couldn't be further from the truth, that they're full of shit whenever they say something like that stuff like this is implemented with a lot of thought and a lot of precision and with very exact intent. We can hear that EA had a very clear vision of microtransactions since as far back as 2011, and you can bet your ass that even after Andrew Wilson took over from Riccatelli, the mentality, the mindset, the pursuit, the vision behind predatory monetization has carried on. The cherry on top to this rather villainous piece of dialogue from Riccatello is that he talked about how he can personally attest to how well these insidious microtransactions work, gloating about how he himself spent $5,000 in a year on this type of stuff. Except for this guy, the former CEO of EA, someone who has millions of dollars to burn, $5,000 is a drop in the bucket. But for the average citizen, for those psychologically susceptible to getting addicted to these kinds of microtransactions and who only make a standard wage, $5,000 is a huge deal. No doubt the likes of Riccatello and Andrew Wilson know this. They know that this is pretty harmful for certain people, especially those who don't have all that much money to spend but can't help to spend that money on microtransactions because of brain chemistry. But they ultimately don't care as long as the money comes in. Whether livelihoods are shattered due to compulsive spending or not is irrelevant to these soulless dirtbags, because their ultimate goal is to rake in that cash by any means necessary, even through the exploitation of vulnerable customers. To finish things off, Riccatello said that the monetization model he proposed is a great model that, quote, represents a substantially better future for the industry.
Calling yourself a community that cares.
Oh, but we do care, Nicholas.
It's all about the greater good.
The greater good.
How can this be for the greater good?
The greater good.
Shut it!
You know, that's like the equivalent of Voldemort saying that subjugating Muggles will create a better world, or Emperor Palpatine saying his galactic empire will make for a better universe or whatever, or Hitler believing that ridding the world of certain groups of people will make the world a better place. Now, obviously, those are hyperbolic examples. Genocide and fascism are far worse than, shady monetization tactics in video games, but it's the same idea of touting a better future by doing something shamelessly disgusting that only really benefits the elite few. When Riccatello mentions the betterment of the video game industry through in-game monetization, he's clearly just referring to corporate interests and his own personal interests. In the eyes of CEOs like him, consumers and workers don't play a part in the industry. They're just the tools by which they can achieve their financially driven agendas, because to them, an industry is all about the corporations, the executives that run them, the investors that keep them afloat, and all the money that they can make in this messed up system. So long as these schemes are benefiting the elites, consumers and workers be damned, it'll be deemed that this is all a positive force for an entire industry's future. I'd like to remind you again that this audio recording was from over 8 years ago, and in all that time, EA hasn't changed one bit. This grim torch that Riccatello presented at this meeting was just passed down. If anything, EA has doubled down on the shady schemes laid out by Riccatello, though the company has been forced to backpedal and walk on eggshells lately with AAA games after they got caught red-handed with the disastrous launch of Star Wars Battlefront 2, though they're still not budging an inch when it comes to their big moneymaker, Ultimate Team. That's still the same as it ever was. It still has utterly scummy loot boxes and gambling systems.
We're not gouging, but we're charging.
If anyone for some baffling reason believes in EA's lies about how they have good intentions with the implementation of microtransactions and loot boxes in their games, about how it's all about giving players choice and value and all this other nonsense, about how stuff like this is fun and ethical, look no further than this audio clip from an old EA shareholders meeting, as well as Jörn Strom's Let's Go Whaling keynote that goes hand in glove with Riccatello's statements. Those two presentations alone are more than enough evidence to prove that the video game industry's AAA publishers are out of control, that they've gotten too comfortable in complicitly exploiting consumers for the sake of profit, that there's urgent need for some kind of oversight, with government officials looking like the best option right now because video game organizations won't do anything given that they're lobbied and run by the same companies and executives who wish to see in-game monetization unregulated. Honestly though, these companies' intentions were never really a mystery to anyone with common sense. It's always been obvious, just looking at their actions and their business tactics, that the likes of EA have never had consumers' or developers' best interest in mind, especially once they began obsessing over microtransactions. But in these two presentations from Riccatello and Jörn Strom, you can actually hear it and see it plain as day. And although these clips are years old, they are certainly more relevant now than ever before. And in turn, I feel it's important to highlight them now more than ever. So yeah, I hope you got some insight out of that clip in terms of EA's mindset and their true intentions behind some of the business tactics that they employ. And with that, I'd like to end this news update and discussion video. Thank you for tuning in. Let us know in the comments below what your take is on what you heard from Riccatello from all those years ago. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Yong Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Yong out.